Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim, one more thought on this. What's your view of where this debt ceiling negotiation is likely to end up? And also the comments from President Trump and others about not having any of these entitlement programs on the table in that negotiation. I mean, the classic phrase is that we're going to balance the budget by cracking down on waste, fraud, and abuse. And nobody is for waste, fraud, and abuse, but that is not what got us to debt that's 100% of GDP.
Correct. And this is what is behind the White House's strategy. The reason the president keeps saying, show me your budget and I'll show you mine, is that they want the Republicans to have to detail exactly what it is that they intend to cut. And the White House knows, as everybody knows, that some of this, if you do want to have spending caps, that you are going to have to at least limit the growth of some programs. Now, if Republicans are smart, that is what they're going to look to do, is propose caps, like just to say we need to return to some of the budgets we had prior to COVID, and we need to keep that spending in control. What the White House is salivating for, hoping so much, is that when Republicans finally come out with their plan, that they're going to have killed off entire programs. And you can already see this. The White House put out a document talking about this upcoming meeting and then highlighting some of the bills that had already been introduced in the House and proposals from Republicans to get rid of Pell Grants and to cut money for Medicaid and all of these things that they want to hammer Republicans on and say, look, they want to take away all the things that you Americans really want. So a lot of this is going to come down to how smart Republicans are, how unified they are. If they have reasonable proposals to limit or cap to some degree spending, they can get everybody in their party on board with that. They're going to continue to have more leverage in these negotiations. But if they are pushed by some in their party to come up with far more radical proposals, those are going to be things that they just simply maybe don't have the leverage for, and they're going to give the White House a huge opening to beat on them with. So a lot of this is going to depend now on whether or not Kevin McCarthy, after this big fight to get his speakership, if he can keep his party united.
And I'll add one last thought here, which is the point about reasonable proposals. I went back and looked at what the Simpson-Bowles Commission suggested, and it includes things like raising the retirement age to 68 by 2050 and 69 by 2075. And so while I would expect that to be attacked as a cut to Social Security, I find it pretty hard to imagine that a raise of the retirement age by 2075 is something that would animate a lot of voters in a negative way. I mean, that is so far out into the future. Who knows even what lifespans will be then? Meantime, we have some breaking news this morning. The FBI, Monet, is conducting a planned search of President Biden's vacation home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Here's the statement from Biden's personal lawyer. Today, with the president's full support and cooperation, the DOJ is conducting a planned search of his home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Under DOJ standard procedure, in the interest of operational security and integrity, it sought to do this work without advanced public notice, and we agreed to cooperate. And he also says there will be further information at the conclusion of today's search. Apparently, the only reason we know about this now is that there were some reporters at their house and they noted some black vehicles arriving in the middle of the morning and tried to figure out what was up. And so, Monet, it seems like the classified document problem that President Biden has is potentially only getting worse.
Yeah, I think that has been clear from the beginning that the president himself had no idea what classified documents might be in his possession. Obviously, there were some initially discovered at his office in Washington, D.C., the former Penn Biden Center, followed by those that were uncovered in his garage in his main home in Wilmington. And now it seems as if they're just completely they tried in recent months to overturn their pockets and say, we want to invite the FBI in and make sure that there isn't any shoe that's going to drop very late into this process. But yeah, the special counsel, Robert Hur, is going to be officially beginning work within the coming days. And I think that the investigators probably want to make sure that they at least know the full scope of the mishandling of the documents that President Biden may have done before they dig into the formal process of deciding how egregious the violations were.
There's also news in recent days that the office that the classified documents were originally discovered back in November of President Biden's, that was also searched by the FBI. We did not know this until the stories broke, I think, earlier this week. According to the CNN story, this FBI search happened after November 9th. And so, Kim, I think that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that when the news broke that President Biden's lawyers had discovered some classified documents at that office, there were a lot of people asking, why did the Justice Department not go in and do a search? And apparently the answer to that is they did. But that leads to the second point, which is the White House's transparency around this whole issue, or maybe I should say lack thereof. And remember, this is a search that reportedly took place after November 9th. The 2022 midterm election was on November 8th. And so it does raise questions here about what the president should have told the public when these documents were initially discovered, when the search was being negotiated and planned in the middle of the midterm elections.
Yeah, and whether or not the Department of Justice shouldn't have issued some statement too, just given that this was a political issue. And I mean, their argument would be, well, we don't get engaged with these things around politically fraught periods of time. But there's a double standard there in that there was a lot of stuff that came out about Donald Trump and his search. I mean, then there's questions too about why we're only finding out about this now. The president's lawyers had put out what they claimed was a detailed timeline of what had happened up until now, but apparently it was missing some very key things, like the fact that the FBI searched the Penn Biden Center. This also raises for me another really huge question, because a couple of weeks ago, everyone will remember possibly that the Wall Street Journal had a bit of a news scoop, and it explained that early in this process, the FBI and Department of Justice and the Biden team decided that it would make more sense for the Biden attorneys, following the discovery of these documents at Penn Biden, for the Biden attorneys to do their own search first of President Biden's home and his beach house. And they had this kind of strange argument in the story as to why this would be the right thing to do. And one of the arguments was, well, the FBI was concerned that if they did a search early on, it could complicate their investigatory efforts later on. Now, this made no sense logically to me, but it makes even less sense having now found out that the FBI almost immediately after finding these documents did go in and search them. So that to me raises this enormous question. Why on earth, again, I've raised this before, why on earth were President Biden's attorneys, who didn't even have the ability to look at classified documents, allowed to go in and do the initial search of his home and his beach house, especially now that the FBI is doing it itself? The power that it gave those attorneys to report back what they found, and apparently they didn't even find everything that was actually there, to report the contents and the way in which everything was found. This was an enormous amount of power, and not, I think, a power that would have been given to any other person who'd already been found to have mishandled classified information.
Thank you, Kim and Monet. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.